We now have Brendan Mallon from BBC. Brendan looks after technology in BBC and our BBC archives, I should say. And amongst many things, it's metadata for archive and archive collections. So Brendan will describe the problem, how he faced it and how he solved it in the 20 minutes, which is probably not enough. We will probably extend this because we are 3 minutes late and was scheduled for 25. So without further ado, Brendan Mallon from BBC.
Thank you very much. Thanks, folks. That's spoiler alert there. He gave the punchline away. This is Delia Derbyshire from the Radiophonics Workshop, who realised the first Doctor Who title theme. So I'm going to start with a bit of a question, which is, basically, if you're producing so much metadata these days, are we actually going to be really managing our metadata or just curating sort of a museum of growing inconsistencies? We'll loop back to that at the end, hopefully, and maybe you can help me answer that question, and we'll come to some conclusions. So I'm going to quickly sort of just set out the context for the presentation, as in you are very all familiar with the challenges of the metadata space. I'm going to highlight a couple of key challenges, highlight some of the principles that we adopted, and then explore a little bit more, unpack some of the archives approach, the BBC archives approach, and then if we get some time, we'll get some questions in. So, it's a massive space. This is on the back of Yanni and Paul's presentation yesterday, where they were talking about the digital preservation of the English region's content. So you can sort of see a massive sort of commissioning, scheduling, delivery, restrictions, rights, legal, editorial restrictions, all of those sort of things, compliance. You know it is a massive, massive space before you get into what is the sort of the legacy area of broadcast and media, legacy formats, carrier formats, QC, digitization. And then you've got all of these sort of new forms of metadata, the products of AI and ML, vector embeddings, all of these things. And so what is the overall approach to metadata and how do we manage it? So, key challenges, it's an expansive and growing area. A lot of the production silo operations came from sort of, big radio, big sport, big news operations, all of that type of stuff. So you had sort of overlapping, disjointed metadata sets with different metadata models. You need to archive legacy systems, and how do you sort of switch them off and keep the metadata? And the big one now, which is sort of this convergence that we see particularly in the AI and ML space, is the convergence between archive and production workflows. And we've got sort of some neat solutions for that to avoid people spending their life's money enriching content time and time again. And then there's the sort of new dilemma of moving to the cloud. So this was our strategy, very much around sort of recognizing the value of metadata. And, my boss, Noreen Adams, claims that sort of metadata is the new oil. So let's get out there and mine some. So we wanted to create this sort of core catalogue that could be, representative of the BBC 100 years, but also exploitable and searchable and usable, and turn it into a living artifact as opposed to a dusty old fossil or something that actually becomes a liability. So that's what we were trying to achieve. Develop a unified data model, easier said than done. Make it as flexible and easy to change. Manage the metadata lifecycle. A big one for us was because of all of these sort of separate production silos was to try and deduplicate the metadata, and we've managed to squeeze that down by about a third, which is not bad going, and then link these orphan data sets, because originally a lot of the program paperwork was literally on paper, so then it went to electronic, and now it's online. So you've got sort of at least 3 different sort of challenges about how to try and sort of link all of this data up with a program hierarchy, and we've managed to come up with a conceptual way of doing that. And then of course then you've got to retire a lot of these sort of legacy systems and then retain their data for future use. So some key principles, make metadata shareable, don't lock it away. If there's a metadata field that is upstream, is going to be sort of managed in a different way for the archives then to have their own sort of version of that. And you would not believe how many times in the history of my brief tenure in the BBC, that has become a problem with sort of different people doing what was sort of sensible things at the time, but using different fields for different reasons, and shoehorning data in there that shouldn't have been in there and all that type of stuff. But that's a way around that. Data should be managed at source if possible, and then where it can be managed at source, then it's on a case-by-case basis. As I said, make the changes inevitable, so try and make it flexible, and then whatever the outcome is, make sure that everything's very well documented and then passed on in terms of the transforms, and everyone understands that. So, how did we approach this? Well, as always, we had a good look around EBU Core Plus, Movie Labs. There's lots of sort of good open standards, reference standards. The bit about standards, we all love them because there's so many of them. What we had internally was we had two pretty good standards ourselves in terms of the program information, which is the PIPS model, which is a hierarchical model, and our archive data store. So we effectively merged those two together, and then made that extensible. The big difference here is that this is a content-centric model. So we moved away from sort of managing assets in systems. So this was that tape or that file in news, to a sort of a content-centric approach where we could sort of have all of the program hierarchy in this sort of linked way, which then is extendable out to cut stories, rushes, all of that type of stuff. So we can collect all of the assets for a particular sort of program, series, brand, episode, version, whatever it happens to be, and all of the data then links together. It's flexible because basically our content catalog really is a sort of representation of our model, and vice versa. And if you think of sort of fuzzy change out here and fuzzy change in there, we have a sort of strict schema definition that is rigorously policed by our data teams, our data team inside, and that is sort of is in change control. So therefore we sort of mandate consistency and accuracy through that data exchange. And then if there is a need to change it, then we discuss that in advance, and then we implement that. So that's the way to effectively then decouple sort of fuzziness that you need and flexibility with a strict coherence to a data schema. So media storage, content catalog, search, because there's a big link here between sort of search and discovery, media management, and reporting and insights. So I'll actually skip on to the next layer, because I want to sort of, I know it's a bit of a melt, this one, but if you sort of start over on the left-hand side, those are the data sources coming in. So you think of sort of like Infax is a 40-year-old system that's DOS-based. I really aligned with your presentation on DOS. So it's all DOS-based, and when you want to retire a system, all the data comes into that. So even though you're not going to be able to reuse all of it or reuse any of it, you've got that data there. You can always go back to it. And then it goes into sort of a standard, which is now a pretty standard data science approach around sort of this bronze, silver, and gold. That's called a medallion architecture. And at each stage, then it gets cleaned. So imagine you're pouring in sort of slightly murky water on the left, and on the right out comes lovely, pure, clean water. It's that sort of a process for data, as in it's cleaned and remodeled and matched. And then on this sort of exposed area, then it's exposed in different ways. So it's exposed through a data warehouse to analytics and reporting. So all of you Tableau freaks out there, give us a shout, yeah, for Tableau. I don't like it. The search and discovery layer, that's powering our new BBC library search, so it's all semantic search and all that type of goodly stuff. And then, standard API, machine-to-machine integration. The bit at the top and the bottom are really quite interesting. as in, the content workflows going out to machine learning algorithms, and we use a lot of standard algorithms, as in the same as everybody else, and the data flows back in. So the product of that we're treating as sort of first-class archive assets themselves, the vector embeddings and all those types of goodly stuff, and then we're sharing out that across the enterprise. So that means we don't have to then continually transcribe it and all that type of goodly stuff. And the bottom then is sort of, we call sort of BBC Manage, which is sort of around edit, but it's not really edit. We come up with a concept called an overlay. So it maintains the provenance of the data, but it presents sort of new information to the user. So for example, if a carrier format was wrong, like a 1/4-inch tape, it was actually a CD, you can actually update the carrier format to be right, and it tracks all the history about where it started and all that type of stuff. So and we have a sort of specific sort of area about where you can edit and where you can't edit. If we had more time, I would sort of delve into this sort of who operates in this space, because we started out very much as sort of data engineering, software engineering, but we now, about a year and a half down the track, we've now sort of migrated this out to what we're calling sort of ClickOps. So it's a much sort of reduced complexity operation. So that's probably worth delving to at some later stage. In terms of matching, how do we deduplicate? So this is an example. You've got 3 data sources there, and we run these jobs in logic all the time, and it comes up with, there's a match between sources A and sources B. And then this turns this into this sort of single consolidated match, and so we call this canonicalization. You get extra points if you can pronounce that later on. So this then becomes effectively an item in the gold catalog, and this is how we avoid. In the past, when we poured more content in, the search became sort of noisier and less responsive and head scratchy. So we have this concept of the gold catalog, and this powers our search. We use other data, as we say, but we'll show you that in a second in terms of how that's used. So if you have a look at the relationships and publication events, restrictions, tags, and stuff like that there, you can see some of these then that appear in this sort of, so that's the new BBC Library interface. If you have a look on the right-hand side, you can sort of, or at the top there, you can sort of see the taggings in the publication event and stuff like that there. So when you drill down into this, you can see, for the first time, you can see the whole of a series of, The Singing Detective, and you can sort of see the original telecine transfers, the remastered UHD content, all of those sorts of things. They're all there for the seeing, and then we've sort of aligned what we call sort of BBC Things, which is sort of people, places, and events. These are these sort of tags at the top with our publication. So iPlayer and Sounds, that's all the way back into the archive now. So we've got this sort of virtual sort of reuse cycle. So that's what we're calling then enhanced discovery. And then here's the opportunity. And so the opportunity then is to, when you have your data lake and you've got your enhanced discovery sort of sorted out and is driving your search, then you can go on and then create this sort of managed wider ecosystem for managing the metadata, where you've got inventory management, logistics, disposal, assurance, preservation, all bringing all those sort of data sources so that you can align, parts of part 1 and part 2 to a program, to a series, to a brand, to an episode, all those sort of things. And spoiler alert, we're actually halfway through this now for our AV content, and then we turn next into news, and in parallel, I know that's a bit difficult, in parallel, that's what my boss says, in parallel we're going to try and do radio at the same time. So by the end of this sort of calendar year, we'll have probably like the vast majority of this done. So there we are. And then last of all, to look back to the question that I said at the start, which is my conclusion, is that it's really an archive conundrum wrapped up in a very large data science challenge. There we are. How was that?
Very good.
Thank you, Brendan. That was very fast. I hope you took it all in. So we have a bit of time. 7 minutes to 12, so you really managed to do super speed. My first question, which is probably not my only question, but not only my question either. ClickOps, you got us very intrigued. Tell us more about it.
So ClickOps. So if you think today that you can use things like AWS, I always forget the name of it. Oh gosh, no. There's it's sort of like automation events. So you can use. Oh gosh. Brain damage. I'm having a senior citizen moment now after because I've prepared this. There's a particular AWS tool that you can use that creates an automation event, and it's free, but you just have to be able to use it. Or you can buy things like SDVI or Embrace to do sort of a type of modeling for you. So that type of approach where you could model something as a workflow, and then effectively, rather than having to write code in Python or Java or Node or anything else, then you just effectively you go click, 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 and it does it for you because it does it in the background.
Thank you. Any more questions? We have plenty of time. Don't be shy. Okay, there's one from Brecht.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Thank you so much. It's really, I said to my colleague here, this is top notch. It won't get any better than this on a global scale, I think.
Thank you.
You managed not to mention one word, and that is knowledge graph.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering, like, are you deliberately avoiding it, or?
Well, we do use an awful lot of, because for my sins, my department also builds the delivery systems into the BBC. So we built the first delivery system on AWS's Neptune service, which is sort of graph-based, yeah. It works. It's quite complicated. But the way that we have sort of a lot of this structured is just using standard documentation, standard sort of document approach. So we have a sort of a repository called USED, which is sort of it's basically documents running in the cloud, and that means that it's fast and easy to update and change, and we have a sort of service where people can subscribe to it. So there's a couple of different models that sort of do similar sort of things in a much easier way, rather than having to have a PhD in astrophysics to run something like that. It's a bit like the same thing as Kubernetes. Like we played around with Kubernetes, but oh my gosh, when you're having to pay like a lot of money to experts to come and talk drivel to you, it's a bit.
Thank you, Brendan. We have time for one or two more questions. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much, Brendan. That was for me in particular so relevant.
Good.
I'm wondering if someone is maybe at the beginning of this journey and trying to do a lot of this work that you described in their own institution, where you would recommend that they start?
Great question. I think, I've always said I like to employ people that are smarter than me, so that's my golden rule, number one. And it's absolutely true. I've got a wonderful lead architect and a wonderful lead data manager, so that's having sort of the right team and building the right team is absolutely essential. Have a good chat about the whole end-to-end workflow and rationale of why you're doing something, and don't just sort of start by looking at a small use case and then try and extend it out. So, we had a search product called Archive Search, and it was fantastic because when we started the journey, the fast route in to this was effectively to take proxies and metadata out of each of those silos and then surface them across the enterprise. But we knew that was only sort of a first step, and then we'd have to sort of throw that away because where we wanted to go, this was the vision that we wanted to go into. So sometimes you have to sort of understand that you build something, you're going to have to literally chuck it away and keep your eye on the prize of where you want to go to. So that's a good start. But certainly data modeling and having a good understanding of your data schema and your business requirements would be and also a great start.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? We're actually reclaimed the time because oh yeah, there is one from Mary Lane. Yeah.
I have a question about the difference between the silver and the bronze.
Yep.
Is there a fundamental difference between those two?
Not really. It's just in terms of where the sort of so each of those layers has a sort of a particular pattern in terms of how it's structured. And what I didn't say was that we've abstracted some of the business issues out. So, for example, we could take we're running Spark and Iceberg for our data layer, and that's sitting on top of AWS. So, if we wanted to go to a different cloud provider, we could. So, from a vendor lock-in perspective. But it's just literally where the sort of the modeling happens, because you need that sort of different approach to try and sort of get to optimize the sort of the compute for each of those services. But we can run analytics across bronze, silver, and gold, and do queries on that as well. Yep.
So it's not like that silver and bronze are inaccessible.
No, exactly.
Very much
totally.
are.
And in reality, we actually have 2 or 3 gold layers because they're optimized and tuned for something else. And then if you wanted, for example, you could have an index for sport or an index for news, and you could pander to traditional broadcast needs.
Thank you very much, Brendan.